and welcome to the Green Voice podcast. I'm your host, Grant Ervin with S&B USA, and we're here at the Point Park Studios and the Center for Media Innovation in downtown Pittsburgh. Today on the Green Voice, we're talking about resilience, and I have two really great experts on the topics of resilience here with me today. Chris Gassman. Chris, how are you?
Doing well. Excited to be down here.
Awesome. Good to see you. And also Michael Yamoah coming to us remotely from Dallas, Texas. Did I get that right,
Yeah.
Mike?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we got two time zones represented here. Chris coming to us from the University of Pittsburgh and still the Center for Sustainable Business, correct?
Correct.
And then Michael coming to us from EOS at Federated Hermes Limited. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here today.
Excited. Been a listener for a long time. Excited to be in the conversation. Honored.
Long time listener, first time caller.
Yes.
So all right, that's good. Well, now that you're close by, Chris, and we know that you want to be on the podcast. This is going to be some frequent flyer trips for you down Fifth Avenue to downtown Pittsburgh. So
I'll figure out how to do the bus route going forward, parking in downtown.
well, we were at that new BRT system.
There we go.
So you're going to get like frequent flyer malls. That's going to be awesome. So, Michael, how are things in Texas here today?
It's good. Actually, good weather, not too hot. I think we are past the sort of the peak of the summer, so it's kind of getting nice out there to be out and doing stuff. Yeah.
Okay, that's exciting. So I come to know that you guys have talked a little bit in the past. So you've conspired. I've worked with Chris and had a chance to meet Michael yesterday and get to learn a little bit about his work. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. Maybe, Michael, we'll start out on your side. Maybe if you can give a little brief introduction for listeners, a little bit about yourself and your background and what brought you to EOS.
Thank you. And again, Brian, thank you so much for having me on your show. I think this is a good effort step to kind of bridge the gap in many of the dialogues that we are having around the world. So I work for EOS at Federated Hermes Limited, or you can just say EOS or EOS, whichever way you want to sort of pronounce it. There are many stories about how that name came about. But
We were saying earlier, sorry to interrupt, but just we have our Pittsburgh pronunciation of things, and then you also have a UK pronunciation. So
exactly, yeah. Again, it's still some people say EOS, which is fine because it's which is also sort of fine by and large. So I work within our sort of a global stewardship and corporate engagement sort of team here in North America. So we have a bigger team, almost about 70 plus sort of colleagues from different backgrounds. And we engage, mostly around sort of the public, but also, debt market as well on behalf of our institutional clients, who are mostly institutional sort of asset owners by and large. And a lot of our work is really about we are having dialogues with the sort of with the companies that they're invested in for the long-term interest of their own sort of members, particularly the pension funds, right? So we're going to have about 2.1 trillion of assets under advisement. And a lot of the things that we do is really kind of engage with companies, be that sort of critical voice, but also a listening voice to make sure that there is that sort of bridge between the investors and investee companies as well.
What brought you into this path? I'm curious. I saw your background, and you've had a really interesting path through both academia and industry and nonprofit sector. What got you into the topic of resilience and where you're at here with EOS?
I mean, I have to be very humble in saying that, I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. And then I happen to also live in London for quite a bit. And in my early years, I studied international relations and business. And that obviously, one of my first actually undergrad thesis that I wrote was about the resource curse, right? Where I focused oil and gas discovery and what kind of emerging or developing markets can learn. And that kind of thrusted me directly into the heart of a lot of the debate around, climate, sustainable development, and whatnot. And so automatically living in Washington, D.C., at some point going to school in George Washington University and Georgetown later on, I worked, as a consultant for the World Bank and Asian Development Bank on sustainable development related topics. And also, I think I mentioned this to you, Grant. I work for the NRDC at the height of the sort of the Lima COP and then the Paris COP, which was a kind of a definitional moment in the history of climate and border sustainability sort of related issues. So that's what got me into sort of the larger sustainable development field by and large.
And then you also did a stint with in the construction industry, which I want to dive into that because I have a personal connection there working in the construction industry now. So I'd love to swap some stories with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I work for Bechtel Corporation, and everybody knows is the number one in the world
Yep.
in terms of EPC. And when I describe
Engineering, procuring, and construction. Correct.
yeah, I tell people that Bechtel is the company you know nothing about, but everything that you do was built by them, right? Think of the Hoover Dam, the some of the metro systems you have in this country. If you've been to Asia or Middle East or even in London, the Channel, right?
Mhm.
And some of the stories you've heard about Chernobyl, the recontainment, Bechtel was done with the EP on that. So I always tell people they build mega infrastructure, but if you kind of travel through some airports, they probably touched it.
That's
Piles,
interesting.
they probably touched it. Right.
Let's,
Bridge.
we'll come back to that in a second because I want to dive into that. But I want to also introduce Chris. Chris, tell the audience a little bit about who's Chris Gassman and a little bit about the work that you're doing at the University of Pittsburgh.
Sure, yeah. It is a hard, I don't want to say act to follow, kind of Michael's journey in there as well, but similar, international, and varied. So for me, if I were to wind it back to like, how did I get involved and thinking about sustainable business and thinking about where is the world going, what's my role in it, um, and we happen to be here at a college, so I figured give a shout out for students on that front. Coming out of undergrad, I had degrees in international affairs, political science. Like, oh, that's amazing! You can go off and do anything with that. But it's paralyzing because you can go off and do anything with that. So, what
Mm-hmm.
specifically do you go off and do? And so I'd had some friends who were in business and engineering. They had these leadership development rotational programs that they got to go around and do different things. Like, well, that's just bogus. Why do they get to do that and I can't? Let me just go craft my own leadership development program. And so I tried to find where's that overlap, that Venn diagram between the things that I was passionate about, things that I was skilled at, what the market would actually pay me for, and how I advanced my tribe by humanity. And said, all right, well, I'm interested in international things. I've done a little bit of this government sector stuff. Let me try intergovernmental. I'll go work at the UN in Egypt. Let me go try an entirely different sector, work at the .org side, international organization in Qatar, and then let me try the private sector, go and work in Shanghai in China with a local company.
Mm.
And through all of that, got to find of evolution of what at the time was called CSR, a lot of marketing effort around that.
Corporate social responsibility.
Yes.
Part of my job here is to decode acronyms. So that just is if you guys haven't caught on to that. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's good accountability. And saw some folks who were doing that from like, oh, this is a marketing thing, but there wasn't that much substance behind it, right? And so I thought, okay, that's interesting, but not really. But I kept experiencing a lot of societal challenges that were going on throughout there, and things like human trafficking and modern slavery and things like that in each of those different countries. I'm like, this is bogus. How are we still doing this? This is
Right.
like the
21st century.
right, yeah. And so I had this personal desire to say like, hey, I don't want to operate myself in an organization that does that, let alone a market that does that. So how do I tip that to be the market norm that we're doing? At the least, not setting everyone up for success. At the very least, not trafficking each other and doing the worst things possible.
Sure.
So that brought me to Pittsburgh the first time around for the degree on the business side over at Carnegie Mellon to figure out like how do I pull the levers of capitalism, and then the degree over at Pitt in the law school to try and figure out, all right, how do you engage law? What's the environmental considerations? And that eventually took me into another stint in consulting, and eventually back here to Pitt to help lead the center to say, hey, you've done this out with private sector. Can you help us scale this even more now through the center?
I'm curious for both of you in just listening and learning about your backgrounds. The intersection of education for you both is really fascinating, and that business and legal intersection. Michael, and then for you, Chris, like what has that meant for you, both in like your headspace, but also in terms of practical application, in terms of understanding the business world, but also kind of the legal and structural environments and kind of the instruction that you get through a law degree? Michael, I'm curious of your thoughts that.
No, you make a very valid point. I think I was not from a personal point and into sort of the work mode. I think all of us understand that businesses don't exist in the vacuum, right? I mean, if you go back to American history, there was a time in our society where it was to be incorporated as a business, you had to go through Congress, right? That's where your charter from, right? That's what happened. And over time, I think that was like that for about 100 years, right? And then over time, it became something that was kind of given to an agency or something to do. And so the intersection of business and law has always been part of society. The mandate of how you operate operate a business is always built around rules and some regulations, but also probably to what Chris was mentioning earlier on, some sort of social contract. So we'll call that social license to operate. It's sort of the unwritten rule by and large, or kind of the unwritten sort of part of it. So you need those things working in tandem. I would tell you one thing in the sort of the stewardship EOS sort of world, right? We always see that we engage based on financial and fiduciary sort of core responsibility. That is rendered to us through some sort of regulatory mechanism, right? That we are the voice, not just of our shareholders who have hired us to really kind of communicate what is important to them, not what they are mandating companies to do. No, what is important to them. And in that dialogue, companies also have a responsibility to their shareholders granted through the capital market system. I think one of the things I was telling you, Grant, yesterday was like, think of the capital market as a markets too. And this is actually not my own. I have to give credit to Tim Yeomans, who used to be my boss. And he always said that you have companies, you have boards, and then you have shareholders. Each have it as a responsibility defined by the rules of the capital market and forced through the SEC and many other organizations. And company executives are supposed to manage a company, the board is supposed to oversee. Shareholders have a voice through shareholder meetings and other means to contribute to that sort of value creation. And so the work that I do is a mix between business and how you kind of leverage the laws or the rules to kind of have that dialogue for the benefit of the value of the company, but also for your client. So that's how I think about the way sort of business and law often works together.
Interesting. What about you, Chris? I mean, that same similar types of intersections.
Yeah. So dittos to many of the points, Michael, that you raised. And I love in there give a very firm +1 to the idea that people think like, oh, we're in the U.S. That means we like our preferred state is unregulated market, and like that's just like markets are regulated, right? We've created a space so markets exist because we've created that space for them, right? So there's that difference
You
between
need that structure.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. There's a difference between the Wild West, where everything goes lawlessness, and what is current U.S. flavor of capitalism, Denmark flavor of capitalism, mainland China flavor of capitalism, right? So there's a very big difference between deregulated or unregulated or not regulated, right? So just I think that level setting, Michael, of like where do companies come from is important for folks to keep in mind, and so that role that law plays with business is important.
Which is interesting, though. I just want to pick on that for a second because you hear a lot about this, business people talking about like the overburdensome regulatory
Right.
structure, right? But on the other side of the mouth, you often hear business leaders talking about the need for consistency and transparency, right?
Yep.
Are those things in conflict?
Not necessarily. They don't have to be,
Mhm.
especially if you can frame it and you can engage those stakeholders and like, you all want a fair playing field,
Right.
right? You want a fair playing field that you can win on, but like you want a field where you're like, hey, there's a possibility for me to compete here, right?
Right.
Like you want some kind of fairness, and it's my experience anyway, at least in each of the different markets that I've come to, we might have a different concept of what is fair,
Mhm.
but we're all seeking fairness. I don't know, Michael, if that resonates for you in your international experience.
Like that, you're absolutely right. I think let's be honest. There are genuinely rules that can be burdensome, right?
Sure.
I think and there are sometimes a lack of rules can create sort of those negative externalities that might resolve.
Mhm.
I'm a firm believer in the fact that finding optimal sort of ways to blend business interest and also societal interest and people by and large is always going to be challenging because the trade-offs are always going to be out there. And I think the optimal point is always when we are talking. And I'm not sort of self-serving here because I work for EOS, but I do believe that within the existing structures, whether you're in the US or Europe or anywhere in the world, the dialogue is where you actually find that optimization, right? Because, I'm an economist by training, right? We say that information is a public good, but in a capital market, there is also, or even in economics, there's also information asymmetry. The one who has information is likely going to win, probably to Chris, what you're saying, right? And so our dialogue is actually built on the idea that transparency, devoid of even the regulatory environment, helps establish some sort of convenient trust between companies and shareholders. Because we're talking, we at least understand each other. And we don't always have to agree. I don't think that's the purpose of dialogues or even regulations, right? We all have different views about regulations. Like investors have it, companies have it, NGOs have it, academic institutions also have it. And those views are fair, right? But I think the most important thing is the theater of dialogue, right? Which we can come to.
So, and you guys are both in really interesting positions in that respect, right? Talk to me, Michael, and then Chris, about that dialogue. Like, so this terminology of stakeholder engagement, right? Like, you are both at the epicenter of that, but maybe from like slightly different angles, right? With, from conversations with shareholders, Michael, and kind of thinking in terms of the services that EOS provides to help create that transparency in the public markets, right? And then Chris, from academia and the members that you have at the Center for Sustainable Business, you're constantly in conversation with companies, and similarly, just taking in all that information. Talk to me, Michael, first about a little bit about that process and those dialogues and discussions in terms of how you're engaging, and then some of the things that you're starting to hear and get played back to you.
Let me start on this premise. Our clients who are mostly institutional sort of funds and particularly pension funds. I used to hear a story that shareholders are really all about caring for what returns will look like tomorrow or in the near future. And if you're a pensioner, I mean, the ultimate goal is that you work hard and you want to retire and want to sort of be able to live on what you've earned over a period of time, right? And so when we are engaging on our clients, on right, to sort of discuss a number of items with companies by and large. And when I go to companies to talk to them, my mandate is to translate what our clients are sort of asking for, be it around corporate governance, sort of best practices, climate, or other sort of environmental sort of needs, and also just general sort of human capital management sort of requirement. So when I go to companies, one of the first rule I have for myself is I don't know everything. In fact, because I've been on the corporate side, I know that people in the corporate world knows a lot because that's their job, right? So the way the dialogue happens is I am here to learn and offer feedback from what our clients think they are seeing. And I think that perspective is actually what makes engagement a richer ingredient for the broader capital market by and large. Because it's not just only about the fiduciary and the financial relevance, but it's also about building a relationship between owners who may not have a voice and also those who actually have to do the work to deliver value. And our intention in the dialogue is to learn what companies are doing and offer what our clients, by and large, are saying, hey, have you looked at this? And I want to give an example. If I call up a company, let's say in the oil and gas, it's a hard to abate sector. There is often a lot of critique about this space. We are often the needs of the company in our conversation in order to create long-term value and tell them, okay, here's what we are seeing in the marketplace. Have you thought about this? And they will say, yes, we thought about it. We don't think this happening. And then they give you their own feedback. So you kind of bubble that up and then you come back and you sit down with your clients, particularly the shareholders, and say, listen, this is what the company is doing. They've looked at maybe the IEA, they've looked at the IPCC, they've looked at national regulations, and they say that, listen, they plan everything according to those regulations, and they think they're going to be there for 30 years. Right now,
In their current state.
in the current state, right, or even at a future state, crystal ball, that is all about uncertainty. But so is the IEA models and
Sure.
the models. So I think by and large, the conversation is all about trying to get to a point of, can we feel comfortable with the uncertainties that we are all getting in? And I think that is what makes the beauty of the dialogue actually so fundamental in most of our sort of discussions. And it also breeds natural transparency.
That's
by
right.
and large.
And Chris, Michael uses the phrase "hard to abate," right? And so, just to clarify that a little bit, is like that's the sectors that Michael you're talking about hard to abate carbon emissions, right? That's the one of the things that strikes me about the center is that whether it's just because we're in Pittsburgh and there's an origin story to this, but a lot of the companies that are members of your center are in that hard to abate sector. Whether it's companies like ours that are in heavy civil construction where we're working with concrete and steel and diesel emissions and just the manufacturing of big, you mentioned Bechtel, Michael, like big infrastructure is things that we work on at SMBSA, or we've had U.S. Steel at events, here on the podcast, we've had companies like Carmeuse, which are in the limestone manufacturing space. What are some of those things that you're seeing with that hard to abate sector in your stakeholder engagement? Because it's also not just about the environment. I mean, I think Michael, you touched upon like the G.
Yeah.
Governance, right? Like we don't talk about governance, I think, enough. Like the E in ESG gets a lot of the airtime and the sexiness, and the S and the G are get less so. But what are you seeing with a lot of the companies that you're engaging in those stakeholder conversations?
Sure, right. So, thank you for giving me 3 hot takes to react to, and then I can get back to
Yeah,
your
yeah.
original question
All right, you want-
on stakeholders.
Digesting a lot, my friend.
All right, so let's work in reverse order. At least according to Christiana Figueres and folks around like what was the origin for the UN panel around who cares wins, where did we come up with ESG?
Mhm.
If you think about it from the company perspective, the thought was like, yeah, we should start from governance and then go from there. But if you came out with say like, yeah, let's talk about GES or guess, then that would have led to people thinking like, oh, this is just a guess. Then why are we talking about this? And
Acronyms in marketing are always at the core of the challenge. I get it.
yeah, and so since environment was easier to talk about, or what folks had been focusing on, they're like, all right, well, let's just start with the E and put the G at the end. They're like, we're gonna conclude with
Catchy.
governance.
Yeah.
So
They
anyway.
market tested it. It has a market research,
Yeah.
focus groups.
Agreed on that. We can have a other conversation around like the S is probably the least talked about out of those and at least leaned into. So hot take there. You said it 3 times, so I have to call it out. I would encourage thinking about it like you're just earlier in the abatement experience process,
Mhm.
right? It's if we entrench into around like, oh, this is a hard to abate space, we build up the psychological barrier that like it will be hard,
Yeah.
and so it's going to take me longer.
Like
And
diet and exercise, right?
yeah. Versus like, I want to go for a nature bath. I want to go like see what's around my neighborhood and just like breathe in some fresh air. And then like before you know it, I'm doing like 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a lot in the framing of that.
Sure.
Right. And we've had startups coming out of Pittsburgh that have figured out like, hey, in the cement space, right, that got breakthrough energy funding and whatnot, or breakthrough venture funding, they figured out how to abate 80% of the emissions coming out of cement. Right.
Mhm.
So anyway, hot take on hard to abate.
It's not hard if you're putting your energy into it and taking it in bite-sized pieces. That's
Right.
pretty
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah.
right?
If you're coming at it strategically, recognizing that there's an innovation curve, right? Like you're going to be iterating, right? Like it's just you're earlier in that innovation process than other folks that have figured out outtakes earlier, right? Not saying it's not. I'm not saying that it's easy, right? Just like let's not
Just
make
everybody
everybody harder than it needs to be.
Everyone starts their journey at a different point.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And has their own unique journey about it, right? So, um, the last bit in there, Michael, getting back to a piece in there that you had framed up just to make sure that we don't skew it unintentionally one way. We'd said that like rules can create burden,
Mhm.
right? Rules can be burdensome, and that a lack of rules can create externalities.
Mm.
The reverse of each of those are also true. right? Having a lack of rules can also be burdensome, and rules
Creates chaos.
Yes. Yeah. And like, okay, well, now I have to take on a whole lot more in order to stabilize the chaos around me. And we can also entrench externalities. We can externalize things intentionally through rules or unintentionally through rules. So just being mindful of that play. And again, finding through dialogue, finding like, okay, what are we comfortable with? What kinds of trade-offs are we comfortable with helps figure out that from that legal spot. Okay. Hot takes done. Stakeholders.
Yeah. You're there. It was like your wind up. You're ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to keep that to a consultant's three, just three things that we've been hearing from the partners that we've engaged with at the center, right? And if anybody wants to see which partners there are, we're public about it. Those are on our website. It's often been, at least in my experience with the center, the number of years that I've been here, we've been engaged with folks that say like, yes, I want to make the world a better place. I see that there's a role for our organization. Help me understand how. What is a viable business model for us to do this, right? There's the organizations who are engaging us aren't the ones that are trying to figure like, tell me why I should care.
Right.
They're the ones that are like, how do we do this in a way that makes sense as
There's already a curiosity in terms of how they pursue this.
Yeah. For any number of drivers of reasons, right? So just kind of like bullet point A, a lot of people, more than peaks are likely anticipating, are looking for viable business models. So just
a competitive edge.
Yeah. Like, how do I make this make business sense, right? Like, not how do I persuade the board or my boss or whomever that we should do a thing? How do I demonstrate that this is a thing that we can do? Like, this is a viable path for us. So that's just general mindset about the kind of companies that we engage with, and we see a lot of folks in that space. A. B. Of late, a lot of those conversations have also been like, so how do we navigate this disruption? Like amid trying to like figure out our business model, how do we do that amid a pandemic? How do we do that amid a supply chain disruption? How do we do that amid a talent disruption? How do we do that amid all of these societal level, global, existential disruptions?
Right. And therein lies the core here about the topic of resilience.
Exactly. Right. And so that's where you guys were talking about physical or societal infrastructure, right? That's what's led more to our conversations here at the center around organizational infrastructure, right? Like you have these things that you're seeking to do, right? Whether that's you're in the energy space and you're seeking to like, hey, how do I do this in a way that is more climate positive or better by the workforce or what have you? Great. How do you change for that? How do you identify that value? How do you build those business models and scale them up while still doing the thing that you are doing? Like that all takes organizational infrastructure, right? And so that's a lot of the question that companies have been coming to us around. Like, cool, you helped us identify a model. How do we get from here to there, right? How do we scale that up? How do we build that out amidst all this shifting sands that we're in right now? So resilience is increasingly a topic of interest.
I think that's so fascinating because I come from resilience, or my background comes from resilience in the public sector. And like let me give you a little background. Chris knows, but like I served as the chief resilience officer for the city of Pittsburgh for 8 years, and to me it was a fascinating education, on the job training, and it was, I mean, it opened up my eyes to so many different things. One, from its origin, really, in thinking about human resilience and coming from the sense of like, how do I become a resilient person, or really in child psychology, how do you build a resilient child? And then having that kind of amplified at a city and a global scale. And so we were a part of a program called the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities Initiative. And the program offered up kind of four key tools. One was the creation of a chief resilience officer position inside a city government. The second was the idea of building a preliminary resilience assessment at the city scale, and also a resilience strategy. And then the third was this idea of a platform partnership, which brought, companies like EOS, or universities like the University of Pittsburgh, and, hundreds of companies and institutions around the world to help support cities in that journey. And it was fascinating because you mentioned like the innovation component of this, right? A lot of these companies, whether it was a Siemens or a small startup, was trying to innovate and find a new tool, practice, or program that they could offer up to the marketplace. And then the fourth pillar was this idea of a network of cities who are actually thinking about all this stuff. And, as I've transitioned into the private sector, it's interesting to see kind of where the private sector gets it and misses it. And I think that's one of there's a harmony that needs to happen in terms of how public and private can come together, which is why I find the public-private partnership P3 investment space like so fascinating. And like Michael, you mentioned like pension funds, for example, and we're at the epicenter of conversations with pension funds and how they invest in infrastructure assets, right? And then the core reason, that commonality, is the idea to either build resilience in the projects or the communities that need those projects. And the innovation lies in the companies that are providing those services or construction capabilities or investment mechanisms. So there's this huge kind of intersectionality that's happening. That's my hot kind of commercial to set this up a little bit because I love this stuff. But Michael, you are seeing this, and Chris too. This isn't there's the challenges, right? Why we're talking about resilience are major disruptions and things that are unstable, whether that's climate or workforce challenges or kind of pick your shock or stress that exists out there. Michael, we were talking about this yesterday. This also presents businesses an opportunity. Um, Talk to me about that, and what are some of the things, why are you saying that? Why are you thinking that? What are you hearing, from these stakeholder engagements that you do that leads you to that conclusion?
Uh, Let me start off a little bit from academic sense. I always tell my students whenever I'm a guest lecturer, I always tell them that don't be fooled. The world has always gone through disruptions.
Right.
That's all.
This isn't new.
Yeah. That don't be fooled that when somebody tells you the world is coming to an end. My grandpa at some point, said the world was coming to an end when they had world wars and they had farming and then they had all of these changes. So each generation goes through a lot of significant changes, and I think we are at the cusp of our own generational sort of challenges. But I often say I don't define sustainability personally the way we typically define sustainability. I actually kind of always say that what is the problem? What is the solution? And if you have a problem, you have a challenge. And if you have a challenge, you always want to seek a solution. And a lot of the challenges that we are faced today, whether you coin it as a sustainability related sort of challenge, is a problem that is informed by what, Chris, you just talked about, so many different sort of fundamental changes in our society. We have an aging population by and large, not only in the US, but in many, many places.
Mhm.
We also have a lot of changes in the job market, right? Which is things like AI are inherently automating a lot of different sort of things. Values are also changing, right? Geopolitics is also changing. There are countries that are coming up the economic ladder. So by and large, whether it is just socioeconomic, environmental, whatever, there is a challenge in both how we live our life and how we try to sort of seek answers to them. So in our discussions with companies, I guess what we are trying to sort of encourage companies to do is there's an opportunity to create value. In economics, you have something called marginal diminishing return. You cannot keep on thinking that you're going to still create the same thing you're creating and it's going to go into infinity. At some point, you're going to reach a sort of what we call a peak, right? And that peak is when you can make your biggest margins. And the question you have to ask yourself, and for our clients who are pension funds, is what else are you offering us in that 30, 50 years against all the problems? So
Meaning, like, how is your process, program, product different?
product, yes, going to be different in this change. You're not going to keep selling to the same aging population. There's going to be a bigger population that is coming. Your values are different. How are you changing those products, right? We've seen companies think about those quote unquote sustainability problems as an innovation. I think it was Harvard that coined that sustainability and innovation are two sides of the same coin. I actually inherently believe in that theory quite a bit, right? And so these things are, I don't even call them problems. I call them challenges that business have to sort of deal with. So having that sort of climate opportunity dimension is offering companies a different way to think about what the challenges are. So rather than just asking you, give us your scope 1 or 2 emissions, by itself is meaningless unless you are actually trying to solve something, right? Yeah, yeah.
I love it because, that is a really good example. Like the scope 1 and 2 emissions. And for folks that aren't familiar with that terminology, you're thinking effectively of like the energy that you purchase or the energy that you burn, right? Like that's effectively kind of, for us it's fleet and fuel, and then it's utility spend, right? And then our scope 3 emissions, just to be simplified, are really related to kind of materials. That's the hard to abate stuff, right? Which is, concretes and steel. But like one of the things I keep talking about is like we don't collect that just to collect it, right?
Exactly.
It's a serious. This is the underlying, I think, your point, right? Is like that's serious pieces of business intelligence
Yeah.
which relate to optimization, efficiency, potential risks associated with supply chain disruption. Like, what if the cost of electricity goes up 19% in the PJM territory? No, by the way, it did. What does that mean to kind of your financial stasis, right?
Yeah.
So that I think that is such a good point.
Right. Can I say this? The simplest way I've often explained to people is if you have $10 in your bank account, what does it mean?
Right.
Like, I'm just being honest with you. It's like, what does it mean to have $10 in your bank account? It's the same question. What does it mean to measure your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, or have anything like? And I think I told you, Grant, this the time. Yeah, I'm a nerd a little bit. When I finished high school, I went to teach math and science in a junior high, right? And I followed my brother's footstep. And I used to teach, algebra and all those different kinds of stuff. And I'll always tell the kids, I can tell you that 1 + 1 is not equal to 2, it's equal to 11. And they're like, prove me. And I was like, it's all about my assumptions, right? Even when you read financial statements, the numbers mean nothing until you look at the footnote. And the footnote tells you how people are thinking about why those numbers there. And so in broader ESG, sustainability, climate discussions, I think sometimes we get blown away and flown away by the obsession with measurement. Measurement is as only good as how you explain what you're measuring and what you intend to use it for. Without that, it's hard. When I was a sustainability manager at Bechtel, I think I gave you this story. What really got Bechtel to really move on this was because we translated actually a lot of our outputs into business differentiation. So why scope 1? Well, if we can reduce these emissions, we can avoid a lot of regulatory sort of uncertainties around fines, even though they might be minute. But here's the thing, Brendan Bechtel, I respect him so much. He said, well, that is good because we can take that story to Canada, to Saudi Arabia, to Chile and say, we can deliver something of value that will have reduced all of these particulate emissions, right? And that's win work. So you increase, construction, you increase your backlog, right? Communities can trust you for you to come, not to come and destroy the atmosphere by and large. So translating that's why I always try to teach students when it comes to carbon accounting. It's not about the accounting. It's about the assumptions that underlie the accounting.
And how you tell the story, right? I think that's such a good point. That's such a good point. Chris, what are you seeing? I mean, you're seeing some significant things because there's a transition at the center because of this, right? Like you started out as, and I don't want to steal thunder or whatever, but I mean, like you started out as the Center for Sustainable Business. There's to what Mike was saying, language, right? But you're seeing this resilience kind of issue rise, to the top of the stack in terms of what your member stakeholders are talking and dealing with. Talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. The and I think, Grant, you teed up well in there in that it's where what are leaders looking for as far as the need? They still have these ambitions to lead a more sustainable company, to contribute more sustainably, right? And I would be remiss if I didn't make a meme comment somewhere here along the way, just to make this an intergenerational kind of podcast. When we're talking about opportunities in climates, right? It's not like one of my staff actually found one of these and showed it to me at one point, where you have these folks in the corner office in New York City looking at a city on fire and just thinking in suits like, how do we profit from this? Like, that's not what we're talking about when we think about like innovation.
No, you're not sitting there like,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
no, it's like, this is the world that we have, right? Like, how do we build viable businesses in this? How do we solve problems, right? Like, where are the opportunities to solve this, and how do we do this in ways that make viable business sense, right? And that takes figuring out like what you what is that unmet need of underserved communities that you're going to tap into, right? What are those modular structures that you're going to stand up? What are those alliances and smart power, the rest of your innovation ecosystem that you're dealing with? How are you integrating human and artificial intelligence effectively across your value chain, right? It's like these are all of those internal organizational capabilities that folks have been engaging with us around to say, all right, hey, enough people are asking about this. Faculty, let's come together and build a diagnostic tool, a resilient organizational architecture diagnostic, right? The road tool. Then there's a lot of conversations around energy or AI or what have you. So bring together resilience roundtables, right? A lot of the collaborations that we do with folks in building those business models have been more around those resilience business models, right? Like what's a model for us to create resilient value. So there's from a programmatic side as a way to, if you think about sustainability or a sustainable economy as a state to get to, right? Homeostasis, right? A state of balance, right? That's not a model for how do I operate. That's a goal to get to. That's a horizon to get to. So I need some way to enable me to get there, right? And we're looking at resilience as not just the next layer or the next evolution in management thinking. It's also the next evolution. We talked about CSR, corporate social responsibility earlier, right? Like in ESG. So if that's where we're trying to get to, looking at organizational resilience as the way to get to that kind of, hey, we're at a point where the community, where the economy, where the resources that we rely on, those are all in balance with each other, right? We found ways for everybody to continue to excel in ways that are fair.
One of the things we talked about, was as I was a part of the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative, is going back to these definitions a little bit. Like at first, resilience was how do you bounce back? And then there was not pushback against this, but I would call it evolution. People would say it's not just how you bounce back, but how do you bounce forward? Like how do you take an event or a disruption and learn the lessons from it in terms of the inevitable failures? Like natural disasters are always, I think, one of the I don't mean I was going to use the term easy, but I think because they're not easy, but it's one of the ones that people kind of resonate to.
Right. They're relatable.
They're relatable. People have been through a weather disruption, whether that's something, like we've had. Josh Gould was here a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and we were talking about, the weather events that we had in Western Pennsylvania related to, we use the term derecho, a wall of wind, and what does that mean for the utility industry? And you just see, this week, like Duquesne doing a really great job in that, and not just as a response, but understanding that there's always shortcomings in your response, right? Or you learn new lessons. And so as a result, they're evolving and they're, kind of innovating from that. Do you guys see companies taking those lessons and not just trying to bounce back, but bounce forward? Like to use Duquesne as the example there?
Yeah. So, and Michael, I'm sure you're going to end us on a far more eloquent point. So I'll just chime in on a little bit of a theory. Grant, I think you're hitting on it that, and the way that we've been thinking about it, and the way that when we were engaging faculty in finance and operations and strategy, HR, it was very much an affirmative ability, right? It's not just what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's you become stronger because you leaned into the disruption. You become stronger because you leaned into this existential thing, and you came out stronger because of it, right? The other bit in there that I'd flag is not just the learning from the past, what came behind us, but learning from the future, right? As the future becomes increasingly volatile, complex, ambiguous, right? It's like uncertain, complex, ambiguous, VUCA. What does that mean in terms of what capabilities do I need going forward in the future, right? And how do I be resilient in the future that is increasingly opaque as pea soup? And if past experience,
like, how does the corporation endure?
Right. How does it endure if we don't know what supply chains or what talent markets are going to be like with AI the way it's evolving, right? We don't know what the jobs of 2035 are. They're being invented right now. So how do I source talent for that?
Yep.
let alone how do I build a supply chain given geopolitics shifts that are going on around the globe right now, if any number of different ones. And so those are all, given those uncertainties, past experience isn't going to be informative for that. So I have to think differently about that, right? And more resilient businesses think differently. They approach that bit differently.
That's interesting. Michael, I want to turn the corner here. You mentioned a CEO like Brendan Bechtel. And one of the things that, I'm curious about is oftentimes, particularly in this space of resilience, is the role of leadership. And in your conversations with, folks like Brendan and other leaders, you also did some time at the National Resources Defense Council, so kind of a leading NGO. So you've seen it on both sides, right? In the NGO space, in the corporate space. How are leaders, taking this concept of resilience and starting to think or address about some of these we're going to call them disruptions for lack of a better term, innovations, but these issues du jour, like artificial intelligence, which we talked in and around a little bit, like the growing energy demand that is occurring because of artificial intelligence and this, appetite of data centers, but also because of, population and economic growth. How's innovation playing a role in that too? But take that from the leadership kernel. Like, what have you seen across sectors in your engagements that how are leaders or how should leaders be thinking about this?
No, thank you. And I think in my current role, one of the things that I like about it is just ability to have dialogue with uh, board members and also senior executives and how they are sort of dealing with this. I think sometimes we oversimplify it in the world that is outside of the C-suite,
Mhm.
by and large, because we think, well, this is just a climate issue, this is a social issue. Think about it, do right. Sometimes we insert morality and ethics in the mix. Sometimes we set in motivation
Mhm.
in the mix, and sometimes you have to kind of very much measure and actualize it as a financial sort of statement, impact and whatnot. So senior leaders have a lot of things sort of to think through, and I'll just give two things. One before EOS, and then one while EOS. I think prior to EOS, one of the things I always realized about a lot of leaders is like they always wanted to understand what this creative destruction environment looks like. And I mean creative destruction, what Shiprinter really referred to, that every once in a while, things kind of things are forced to change, whether you like it or not, as a leader of any company, right? And I think, think of Pittsburgh. The steel industry boomed at some point, but you can't say that maybe regulations forced out of existence. There were factors that really pushed the certain entire system, how we were building, what we needed to build,
Mhm.
and even our own human sense and need for better, cleaner air, right? Ultimately. And so sometimes you have, as a leader, you have to think about it, not in the worst case scenario, but the purpose of a creative destruction that has different elements to it. And that kind of mentality is better, in my opinion, if you're a leader. You know, when I kind of reference Brendan Bechtel, I sat in rooms with him and he always say this: sustainability is a differentiator. He never advocated for a one line item on sustainability, but he always thought about it this way: if these forces are going to force us to change how we do work, how do we enable the force, then the force enable us,
Mhm.
right? So when you think about
How do you be the driver?
exactly, right? When you think about it, shouldn't be that you, because ultimately, and this is my view, is always controversial by and large. So I have to say this is my view. I say you always don't have to think about sustainability to solve societal problems,
Mhm.
right? It's a label of a long-standing issue from the industrialization era to before the Enlightenment era, all of those eras, right? There's always been problems to solve. But I think what makes it a bigger issue right now is that we want to kind of label it for what it is. And so Brendan always said, listen, and we are going to go into communities to go do it. What does it mean to create a legacy, which is a resilient legacy? And one of those is you need to make sure that jobs are created, people have opportunities, because then that is what you did it for, right? You don't do it because it's a nice edifice, a white elephant by and large, right? And I always love that part of how he spoke, that we don't build power plants because we like to build machines. We build them because the average person will be able to have a good life and be able to pay for it. That we don't just build bridges because we want to just build some nice edifice to represent human ingenuity, but we build it because the average person, I used to write in our sustainability report when we're doing the DC Metro expansion, right? We said, just imagine how many communities can now find jobs in places they could never find a job. Just imagine how many people will be able to benefit from this, right? By and large, they'll be able to spend time with their family in their house and not be stuck in this traffic by and large. And those were the stories we're always getting. When I'm in the EOS, when I talk to a lot of executive, now I won't name names, but there was a utility company that I spoke to that said something to me a few years back, and they said it's very disheartening during the winter when certain decisions they made led to people dying because they could not provide power to them during the colder seasons, and it made them rethink the entire strategy, right? And when you hear a senior leader think like that, you ultimately recognize that they are thinking of this from a system sort of perspective.
Yes.
But the choices are always going to have inherent sort of trade-offs that are very hard sort of to deal with. So the tensions that you have to deal with as a leader always comes from how you think about it beyond even what those of us who believe in, doing things on climate. You have to arrest those sort of conversations as a leader. And I think I told my wife recently, I was like, I can see why people don't like CEOs, but I can also see why CEOs don't even like the job sometimes, right? Because it is a job that, yes, you get well paid for, but ultimately, sometimes people don't actually give you the credit for the decisions that you have to factor things into to make the decisions that matter.
I think that that's amazing because like that's the difference. My friend Fred used to talk about this. The leadership, you have leaders that are transactional and you have leaders that are transformational. And like what you're explaining is a transformational leader that's able to see not just the bigger picture, but the purpose of their corporation within that picture, right? And how they and how they could advance society, humanity, right? Like that's operating at a different level.
Yeah, we have a topic that we often engage on. We call it business purpose. Every company says they have a purpose, right? And sometimes in engagement, we do ask the companies, like if you're a pharma company, say you want to make sure everybody's healthy. And sometimes we ask that question, but how do you measure that? How are you holding yourself accountable to that? Right. And it's hard to measure that in the financial statement, but I think it's a dialogue worth having, because sometimes some companies will tell us, thank you for reminding us of why we do this.
Yes.
Right? Because in their head, they think, oh, investors just want to know about quarterly earnings. But having that conversation is a reminder of our own virtue, that you actually care about it too.
That's deep. I love that. Um, Chris, I want to ask you leadership, and then we'll wrap up here in a second. But what are you seeing from some of the leaders of the centers? Like, are you what Michael's kind of putting out there? Like, is that happening? Like, are you seeing some leaders start to grasp into that space?
Sure, yeah. And so, Michael, what you were talking about in there around, and I think Grant, you teed up transactional versus transformational, right? That's uh, definitely a part of the piece that we look at in there around visions that have a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG.
Yeah.
Trying to spell the acronym out
That's good.
before putting the acronym down. So,
Jim Collins?
yes,
Yes.
yep.
Collins would be proud.
Yep. So the backstory on that one, the research on that, right? Like you want those because they are inspirational, because they motivate, they drive you,
The
right?
North Star.
Yeah. And it's not just like, okay, great, I have a clear line of direction, but it's also something that inspires people, that moves them on there, it moves the soul to actually get involved in, right? Like creating health for people, right? Like versus like, oh, we're just going to be the most profitable healthcare company. Like, okay, well, that's like the same thing that anybody else has out there. Well, like,
Sure.
how is this making your people a higher trust, higher performing group, right? So one, just from the hey, how does this a better business model? It pencils out a lot better on that way, right? But as far as, again, like the leader aspect on there, when we think about that, we boil it down to, just to keep it simple, like a consultant 3 around identity, right? So generally folks assess themselves that they're doing well on their core values, right? And that's generally set by the CEO, if not like shared amongst that C-suite, right? What is the tone of the organization? What are things that the organization values, right? That those values are well understood by everybody, and that those are how, like, even what's in our gift shop, our corporate gift shop, like that informs those kinds of decisions, right?
Mhm.
We were talking about vision, right? People are usually less assertive that their organization has a clear North Star that really drives that like is shared in understanding and drives decision making. So that's usually the area of opportunity for folks within identity. And again, that's set by the top, that's set by the leadership. If you don't have that, it's a lot more challenging than
Sure.
ever. And then the last one is your core capabilities, your core competencies, right? Like what is distinctive about you versus any other organization, right? What are the ingredients in your kitchen that you're bringing to the recipe, right? And people think they're good on those and they're good on the values, but again, the vision, like which direction are we running at, is usually the harder part.
Is the hardest part. So we're coming up to the fourth quarter here of the year, just to date the show. So one final question for the two of you gentlemen. Chris, I'll start with you, and Michael, I'll let you take us home. What's top of mind for you guys in terms of actions or things that you're working on here as we start to head off into the end of 2025?
Okay. So lots of things. But
Pick one. Pick one.
take one.
That's
Yeah.
why I saved the hardest question for last.
Um, really trying.
Michael's smiling because he's like, I get to think a little bit. We'll let Chris sweat.
Yeah.
So really trying to take the lessons that we've learned around this resilience journey and thinking like, how do we scale that more effectively,
Mm.
right? How do we be more mission efficient around that? And so there are, while keeping it to one thing, there are a few different flavors of that folks would likely see around it, like beyond just the resilience diagnostic, adding in some interpretation bots, AI tools around that to say, hey, don't just give me my blood work back on my organization, but like, where are my prioritized, maybe top 3 areas that I should focus on, right? To help make that more implementable for people. Taking things like the executive development that we've done, great with your team and others around resilience strategies, how to create resilient value, bringing that so that people around the world can do that, right? So you don't have to do that synchronously with us. How do you
expand that?
Right, exactly. How do you scale it out? Meet people on their time, right? So doing it online or doing it around particular disruptions like energy or AI, right, that are more relevant and particular to them. So if folks tune in here over the next couple of months, next couple of weeks, they'll see more of those kinds of opportunities rolling out. So really just saying like, hey, there's been a lot of learnings over 2025. How do we, like any good innovator, keep scaling those, bringing more of those out to the market? It's just like, here's some resources, right?
For you to use.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for that. Michael, fourth quarter. We're heading in. What's top of the stack for you?
I'll break into 3 buckets, and I think I don't want to sound like too optimistic, because
You can if you want to.
yeah, I do think there is so much opportunity going into the future. And I don't know why I feel that. Maybe because I'm talking to companies and I'm thinking about things differently, right, over the years. But I think there are inherently a lot of opportunities. I actually have called this as the Enlightenment 2.0, right? Because we become very self aware of our society, ourselves, our values, and companies have by and large become. Now, let's give companies credit. Companies, by and large, were not doing all of these things that we think of right today, 100 years ago. Your purpose was to do what you have to do to maintain profit. And that remains true, right? That profit is very important. I work for an investment firm. The companies that we invest in, we don't just give goodwill, we give capital, right? And that matters, which means that you have to still focus on the financial sort of statements. And I think that is very, very important. Companies need to focus on how they bring things back to value creation. And I think that's where you can start thinking about opportunity, and value creation can be reflected on how you align it to your financial sort of reporting. So that, I think, from a future perspective, the companies want to be strong, robust. We need that to happen. The communication and alignment needs to happen. The siloed discussions cannot lead us anywhere. Otherwise, we'll still keep things in the CSR box. an afterthought. So we need to bring things home back to what matters the most, which is how are we going to exist for the longest time, right? And it's all about, by and large, your financial performance. And the way you only improve your financial performance is how much value you create. And so that's why I see opportunity. That companies can look at the problems in the world and then bring in that opportunity. And I know, Chris, this is not to say that we want companies to go and say, how do I profit from the fire? But, I will say this, by and large, we want companies to think about all the alternatives. Even if it's how do you profit from the fires, it could be the solution lies in how you actually solve the fire, right? We don't want to limit companies' ability to innovate. I think we need to do that in an area where they can actually those discussions to the table, because eliminating that can be very problematic. The other thing I am so excited about is this idea of I've tried to figure a way to define resilience because we don't talk much about it. And I actually personally do get frustrated by that. So we've spent more than 50 years talking about emissions, especially in the climate space. We need to start talking about impacts and resilience because a lot has happened, a lot has changes, societies, communities, companies. The magic has happened by and large. We've seen amazing technology, like we mentioned about even in the cement or even in the steel industry or even in other forms of it, a lot. But I think because we are focused on the process, we are losing the taste and the flavor of the impact. And that story sometimes diminishes. And I'll end by saying this. While we're doing all of these things, and this is just my way of sounding a little bit motivational, ultimately, I think this is not just about the planet. It's about us. And if we can't tell the story of us, then what is the purpose of all the things that we are doing? It's about jobs. It's about somebody getting the best care. It's about somebody finding opportunity. It's about people having better life. It's about the retiree being able to think that they can actually retire on the hard work they put in over the last 60 years. So the center is people, whether we like it or not.
Yep.
And if we can bring the story back to that, I think we are missing the bigger picture.
I think that's a terrific place to stop. Michael, Chris, thank you so much for your enlightened remarks. This is a great discussion.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate both of you for what you're doing and keep doing the good work. And I hope that we can have this conversation again soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. And thank you for listening in to The Green Voice. Thank you to the team here at Point Park University and the team with Pittsburgh Earth Day. Wayne, Julia, Tanner, Anthony, the entire team, thank you guys so much for all that you do. Thanks again to our great guests, Michael and Chris, and thank you for listening. I'm Grant Ervin with S&B USA. Have a great day and hope you listen to us again soon. Thanks.
Thanks.